Good day and welcome. My name is Culturally Proletarian, and today we will be reading the Bolshevik organizations against, in quotation marks, left communism. Now, this is an old article from the Red Spectre, which used to exist before certain problems arised. But the Bolshevik org is around, and they are doing good stuff, including, writing great articles of important value for the future of the working class. This entire work covers both, Council Communism by Matic, it covers Bordigism, it covers left communism and Leninism, it covers modern left communists. It covers a lot of areas, which is quite good. I haven't read the entirety of it previously to this, but its quality is outstanding due to the rigorous standards that the Bolshevik org puts on themselves. I recommend reading it yourself, and I will be linking it in the description of this video. On with the reading. Against Left Communism. Introduction. Left communism is a revisionist and anti-Marxist trend within the socialist movement. This is not an original claim. Even Lenin himself wrote a polemic on the subject. See Left-wing communism, an infantile disorder. Left communism is frequently allowed to reign freely on bourgeois media because, it is useful for the bourgeoisie, as it has no revolutionary potential. The two main trends in left communism are Council Communism and Bordigism. Council Communism. We can begin with a short explanatory passage from Paul Matic, one of the first Council Communists. Quote, "The parties of the workers, like those of the capitalists, become limited corporations. The elemental needs of the class were subordinated to political expediency. Revolutionary objectives were displaced by horse trading and manipulators for political positions. The party became all-important. Its immediate objectives superseded those of the class. Where revolutionary situations set into motion the class, those whose tendency is to fight for the realization of the revolutionary objective. The parties of the workers represented the working class and were themselves represented by parliamentarians, whose very position in parliament constituted resignation to their status as bargainers within the capitalist order, whose supremacy was no longer challenged." End quote. Matic, The Masses and the Vanguard, 1938. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of what a vanguard party is. A vanguard party is not a small group of people who aren't proletarians trying to represent the proletariat. A vanguard is the most advanced, most politically class-conscious section of the proletariat. The vanguard party is the political representative of the vanguard. The more people are class-conscious, the more people are in the vanguard party. The Bolshevik party had millions of members who were laborers themselves, not a part of some, quote, political class. This also goes against Marx and Engels, who said, quote, "Against the collective power of the propertied classes, the working class cannot act as a class except by constituting itself into a political party, distinct from and opposed to all old parties formed by the propertied classes. This constitution of the working class into a political party is indispensable in order to ensure the triumph of the social revolution and its ultimate end, the abolition of all classes." Karl Marx, Resolutions of the Conference of Delegates of the International Working Men's Association. And quote, "Experience has shown everywhere that the best way to emancipate the workers from this domination of the old parties is to form in each country a proletarian party with a policy of its own, a policy which is manifestly different from that of the other parties, because it must express the conditions necessary for the emancipation of the working class. This policy may vary in details according to the specific circumstances of each country, but as the fundamental relations between labor and capital are the same everywhere, and the political domination of the possessing classes over the exploited class is an existing fact everywhere, the principles and aims of the proletarian policy will be identical, at least in all Western countries. Friedrich Engels to the Spanish Federal Council of the IWMA, 1871. The primary mode of organization of the proletariat, according to Marx and Engels, is not a workers' council, but a party. After all, a party is, by definition, the political representative of a class. Matic also believed that the Russian Revolution did not have proletarian aims. Quote, I deny the assumption of the first question that the Bolshevik Revolution had proletarian aims. The proletarian character of the Russian Revolution is only apparent. It is true that the revolutionary workers were striving for a vaguely conceived sort of socialism, but in every bourgeois revolution in which workers participated, proletarian objectives were evident. Continuing, the Bolshevik Revolution, however, aspired to the development of modern industry and of a modern proletariat, a fact which comes clearly to light in the Bolshevistic concept of socialism, which contains wage labor and capital production and secures those relations through the division of society into rulers and ruled. Continuing, it's often asked how it is possible that power won by the workers may, by way of revolution, may be lost again without a counter-revolution. The latter here is conceived as a return of the old authorities, but counter-revolutionary actions are not confined to old authorities. New officials can engage in them just as well or even better. The counter-revolution against the state-capitalistic intent of the Russian Revolution was defeated by the Russian masses following the directives of the Bolsheviks. This counter-revolution against the proletarian objectives expressed within this revolution was triumphant with the success of Bolshevism, which transformed private property into state property and continued the exploitation of the workers on state capitalistic terms. Matic, was the Bolshevik Revolution a failure? 1938. This demonstrates a profound misunderstanding of the NEP and of its character, one that's conclusion results in Menshevism somehow being more proletarian than Bolshevism. The Russian Revolution was a proletarian revolution. It had to temporarily create state capitalism as to have a majority of the masses be members of the industrial proletariat. In Russia, before the Russian Revolution, capitalism was extremely underdeveloped. Ergo, the population was majority peasantry instead of proletarian. Quote, in view of the fact that in the epoch preceding a commodity economy, manufacturing is combined with the raw materials industry, and the latter is headed by agriculture, the development of commodity economy takes the shape of the separation from agriculture of one branch of industry after another. The population of a country in which commodity economy is poorly developed, or not developed at all, is almost exclusively agricultural. This, however, must not be understood as meaning that the population is engaged solely in agriculture. It only means that the population engaged in agriculture also process the products of agriculture, and that exchange and the division of labor are almost non-existent. Consequently, the development of commodity economy, eo ipso, means the divorcement of an ever-growing part of the population from agriculture, i.e. the growth of the industrial population at the expense of the agricultural population. It is in the nature of capitalistic production to continually reduce the agricultural population as compared with the non-agricultural, because in industry, in the strictest sense, the increase of a constant capital at the expense of variable capital goes hand in hand with an absolute increase in variable capital despite its relative decrease. On the other hand, in agriculture, the variable capital required for the exploitation of certain plot of land decreases absolutely. It can thus only increase to the extent that the new land is taken into cultivation, but this again requires as a prerequisite a still greater growth of the non-agricultural population. Lenin, The Development of Capitalism in Russia, 1923. For socialism to develop, it needs a high amount of development of capitalism, so it must develop capitalism itself. The Mensheviks proposed not to develop socialism at all, while the Bolsheviks proposed to quickly develop capitalism under strict oversight by the proletariat, and then take over. This was state capitalist, but it quickly became socialism. This argument used by left-coms can only logically lead to Menshevism, a complete bourgeois economy. Not only this, there was a lack of tools to organize and keep track of production, which was required for central planning. Quote, "At present petty bourgeois capitalism prevails in Russia, and it is one and the same road that leads from it to both large-scale state capitalism and to socialism, through one and the same intermediary station called the National Accounting and Control of Production and Distribution. Those who fail to understand this are committing an unpardonable mistake in economics. Either they do not know the facts of life, do not see what actually exists and are unable to look the truth in the face, or they confine themselves to abstractly comparing socialism with capitalism and fail to study the concrete forms and stages of the transition that is taking place in our country." Lenin, The Tax in Kind, 1921. Bordigism. The next trend in left communism is Bordigism. Amadeo Bordiga, the namesake of Bordigism, said that, quote, "It is only when society is moving beyond these three features of present-day economy, private ownership of the products, monetary market, organization of product by enterprises, that it will be possible to say that it is going towards socialism." Bordiga, Propriété et Capital, 1948. This not only says that there can be no commodity production under socialism, but that there can be no personal property, a conclusion eerily similar to the opinions of reactionaries on what socialism actually means. Again, Marx and Engels do not agree with this at all, as shown in the Communist Manifesto. Quote, "We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labor, an appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labor of others." Marx, Communist Manifesto, 1848. Perhaps a new communist could be excused for not having read the Communist Manifesto, but not Bordiga, the founder of the Italian Communist Party. Not only this, but he was apparently also against worker ownership of the means of production. Quote, "The socialist program insists that no branch of production should remain in the hands of one class only, even if it is that of the producers." Bordiga, Le Programme Révolutionnaire, 1958. Essentially, Bordiga is arguing against any ownership of the means of production at all. He believes in neither private nor public ownership of the means of production. This formulation, however, does not make sense. Bordigism is full of these types of formulations, which are formulations that use fancy terming and sound good until you realize what the actual meaning is. Bordigism makes no sense. Bordiga was also against democracy. Quote, "Democracy cannot be a principle for us. Centralism is indisputably one, since the essential characteristics of party organization must be unity of structure and action." Bordiga, The Democratic Principle. And again, in a basic work, The Principles of Communism, Engels refutes him. Quote, "Above all, it will establish a democratic constitution, and through this, the direct or indirect dominance of the proletariat." Engels, The Principles of Communism, 1847. However, Bordiga was not only against a democratic constitution, he was against any constitution in general. Quote, "Anything such as a codified and permanent constitution to be proclaimed after the workers' revolution is nonsense. It has no place in the communist program." Bordiga, Proletarian Dictatorship and Class Party. This trend is made even stranger by the fact that he claims to be a Leninist. Left communism and Leninism. As I mentioned before, Lenin wrote a polemic on left communism entitled Left-wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. In it, he gave scathing critiques of left communism, including one of the portrayals by left communists of the party and of democratic centralism. Quote, "I repeat, the experience of the victorious dictatorship of the proletariat in Russia has clearly shown even to those who are incapable of thinking or have had no occasion to give thought to the matter that absolute centralization and rigorous discipline of the proletariat are an essential condition of victory over the bourgeoisie." Lenin, Left-wing Communism and Infantile Disorder, 1920. However, left communists continue to praise the Bolsheviks, despite having no understanding of their methods and ideas. For example, the left communists were against the use of bourgeois parliaments while praising the Bolsheviks who used them. Quote, Third, the left communists have a great deal to say in praise of us Bolsheviks. One sometimes feels like telling them to praise us less and try to get better knowledge of the Bolshevik tactics. We took part in the elections to the Constituent Assembly, the Russian bourgeois parliament in September to November 1917. Were our tactics correct or not? If not, then this should be clearly stated and proved, for it is necessary in evolving the correct tactics for international communism. If they were correct, then certain conclusions must be drawn. Of course, there can be no question of placing conditions in Russia on par with the conditions in Western Europe. The point is not whether bourgeois parliaments have existed for a long time or a short time, but how far the masses of the working people are prepared, ideologically, politically, and practically, to accept the Soviet system and to dissolve the bourgeois democratic parliament, or allow it to be dissolved. It is an absolute, incontestable, and fully established historical fact that in September to November 1917, the urban working class and the soldiers and peasants of Russia were, because of a number of special conditions, exceptionally well prepared to accept the Soviet system and to disband the most democratic of bourgeois parliaments. Continuing, the conclusion which follows from this is absolutely incontrovertible. It has been proved that far from causing harm to the revolutionary proletariat, participation in bourgeois democratic parliament, even a few weeks before the victory of a Soviet republic, and even after such a victory, actually helps that proletariat to prove to the backward masses why such parliaments deserve to be done away with. It facilitates their successful dissolution and helps to make bourgeois parliamentarism politically obsolete. Lenin, Left-wing Communism and Infantile Disorder, 1920. Quote, I have had too little opportunity to acquaint myself with left-wing communism in Italy. Comrade Bordiga and his faction of abstentionist communists are certainly wrong in advocating non-participation in parliament. Lenin, Left-wing Communism and Infantile Disorder, 1920. All this goes to show that left communists who claim to be Leninists, in fact, are not. Left communism is fundamentally anti-Leninist and therefore anti-Marxists. Modern left communists. Modern left communists tend to adopt different talking points than earlier ones, although they still tend to use the same basic talking points a lot, such as the belief that there can be no exchange of commodities, commodity production, under socialism. An interjection here. The Bolshevik org also has created a work specifically on the topic of socialist commodity production, titled Socialist Commodity Production. Fitting, isn't it? But that is for another video. Continuing on. To begin, did not slave and feudal societies make use of commodity production? Were they capitalistic in nature? A Marxist would argue that they are not, that they are pre-capitalist modes of production. No. Capitalism is not production based upon the commodity, but production based upon capital. The relations of production of capitalism are that of worker and owner, proletarian and bourgeois. For capitalism to exist, there must be capital. It is thus possible for commodity production to exist without capital. Quote, it is said that commodity production is bound to lead to capitalism all the same under all conditions. That is not true. Not always, and not under all conditions. Commodity production must not be identified with capitalist production. They are two different things. Capitalist production is the highest form of commodity production. Commodity production leads to capitalism only if there is private ownership of the means of production, if labor power appears in the market as a commodity which can be bought by the capitalist and exploited in the process of production, and if, consequently, the system of exploitation of wage workers by capitalists exists in the country. Capitalist production begins when the means of production are concentrated in private hands, and when the workers are bereft of means of production and are compelled to sell their labor power as a commodity. Stalin, Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR, 1951. Quote, first, the state cannot carry on any economic development unless the army and urban workers have regular and adequate supplies of food. The exchange of commodities must become the principal means of collecting foodstuffs. Secondly, commodity exchange is a test of the relationship between industry and agriculture, and the foundation of all our work to create a fairly well-regulated monetary system. All economic councils and all economic bodies must now concentrate on commodity exchange. which also includes the exchange of manufactured goods. For the manufactured goods made by socialist factories and exchanged for the foodstuff produced by the peasants are not commodities in the political economic sense of the word. At any rate, they are not only commodities, they are no longer commodities, they are ceasing to be commodities. Lenin, Instructions of the Council of Labor and Defense to Local Soviet Bodies, 1921. Quote, "We know that the means of production and subsistence, while they remain the property of the immediate producer, are not capital. They become capital only under circumstances in which they serve at the same time as the means of exploitation and subjection of the laborer." Continuing, "So long, therefore, as the laborer can accumulate for himself, and this he can do so long as he remains possessor of his means of production, capitalist accumulation and the capitalist mode of production are impossible." Karl Marx, Capital, Volume 1, 1867. Quote, "It was shown that the appropriation of unpaid labor is the basis of the capitalist mode of production, and the exploitation of the worker that occurs under it, that even if the capitalist buys the labor power of his laborer at its full value as a commodity on the market, he yet extracts more value from it than he paid for, and that in the ultimate analysis, this surplus value forms those sums of value from which are heaped up constantly increasing masses of capital in the hands of the possessing classes. The genesis of capitalist production and the production of capital were both explained." Friedrich Engels, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, 1880. An attack on the idea of socialist commodity production is not only an attack on Lenin and Stalin, but an attack on Marx and Engels, who defined capitalism not only as commodity production, but also as expropriation of surplus value. Socialism in one country. A vast majority of left communists are against the idea of socialism in one country. That is, the idea that it is possible to build socialism in, well, one country. Quote, "It was only within the guidelines of the invariant basis of this program that it was possible to add several points concerning our analysis of fascism, and more generally of the increasing fascist nature of modern capitalist society, and concerning the relations between the World Proletarian Party and the state which is born as a result of the revolutionary victory, renouncing all the treachery and deceit of such an idea as socialism in one country." Bordiga, Fundamental Thesis of the Party, 1951. Quote, "Attempt at a greater national sufficiency forced upon Russia as it has been forced upon all other capitalistic countries is now celebrated as the building up of socialism in one country. The disruption of world economy, which explains and allows the forced development of state capitalism in Russia, is now described as a side-by-side existence of two fundamentally different social systems. However, the optimism of the labor movement seems to increase with each defeat it suffers." Paul Matic, Council Communism, 1939. However, Lenin proves this attack on socialism in one country to be folly. Capital is at different levels of development in different countries, and it needs to have a certain level of development for a proletarian revolution. So a proletarian revolution will occur at different times in different countries. This is a simple proof which completely disproves attacks on socialism in one country. Quote, "The victory of socialism in one country does not at one stroke eliminate all wars in general. On the contrary, it presupposes wars. The development of capitalism proceeds extremely unevenly in different countries. It cannot be otherwise under commodity production. From this it follows irrefutably that socialism cannot achieve victory simultaneously in all countries. It will achieve victory first in one or several countries, while the others will for some time remain bourgeois or pre-bourgeois." Lenin, The Military Program of the Proletarian Revolution, 1916. Quote, "As a separate slogan, however, the slogan of United States of the World would hardly be a correct one. First, because it merges with socialism. Second, because it may be wrongly interpreted to mean that the victory of socialism in a single country is impossible, and it may also create misconceptions as to the relations of such a country to the others. Uneven economic and political development is an absolute law of capitalism. Hence, the victory of socialism is possible first in several or even in one capitalist country alone. Lenin on the slogan for United States of Europe 1915. This is not an argument against internationalism. Internationalism does not mean simultaneous international revolution, because that is impossible. What it does mean can be found within Leninist theory. For example, revolutionary defeatism is a proletarian internationalist theory. The thesis of this theory is to desire the defeat of one's own government in an imperialist war. This may seem ludicrous, but it is not. The thesis of this theory is not to desire the other imperialist parties in the war to win. It is to desire that the imperialist war be turned into a civil one, a revolution. This theory, instead of falling for the social chauvinist imperialist trap of wanting your country, ruled by an exploitative minority, to win the war once it breaks it, wants this victory to belong to the international proletariat, including the parts of it found in all belligerent countries. Red bourgeoisie. The red bourgeoisie is quite a strange political slogan. It is meant to say that the central planners and politicians somehow form a separate class from the proletariat. Marxism defines class as a group with a separate relation to the means of production. Central planners and politicians under socialism, e.g. the USSR, did not have a separate relationship to the means of production than the proletariat. By this logic, the intelligentsia is a separate class, while it is actually a stratum. Quote, "This working class intelligentsia already exists in Russia, and we must make every effort to ensure that its ranks are regularly reinforced, that its lofty mental requirements are met, and that leaders of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party come from its ranks." Lenin, A Retrograde Trend in the Russian Social Democracy, 1899. The logical conclusion of this concept is exploitation coming from the intelligentsia, which does not make sense in the slightest. The proletarian intelligentsia can exist, and it does. Therefore, the red bourgeoisie does not. Stalinist Hoshites. Recently, a new trend in left communism has emerged, which strangely calls itself Stalinism Hoshism, and is against the ideas of both Stalin and Hosha. The primary organization representing it is the Comintern, Stalinist Hoshites, or Comintern SH. This organization rejects socialism in one country, a revisionist and ultra-left spin on the existence of capitalist encirclement. Quote, "The world capital reigns above all by its armed power. Therefore, this armed power must be destroyed by the power of the world proletarian weapons. All counter-revolutionary forces must be disarmed on a global scale. The world proletariat conquers and performs its political power by means of arms. The world dictatorship of the proletariat is the armed ruling system of the reigning workers' world. Given the counter-revolutionary armies of the world bourgeoisie, the conquest and defense of the political power of the world proletariat is impossible without its own proletarian Red World Army. This proletariat Red World Army, guided by the Comintern SH, shall develop to an army of the socialist world. Integrated in the process of world production, integrated in world socialism's construction, integrated in the whole development of the socialist world society. The proletarian Red World Army will be abolished together with the whole system of the world dictatorship of the proletariat, not until the epoch of world communism, and by no means beforehand." Continuing, "During the period of the construction of world socialism up to the transition to world communism still consists the danger of capitalist restoration. This happened within former socialism, which the world imperialists have imbibed. This time, however, we will be equipped with global ways and means, namely, we will replace capitalist revisionist world encirclement by socialist world encirclement. In addition, the world proletariat will lead a determined struggle against all manifestations of bureaucratism. We have learned the tragic historical lessons of restoration of capitalism and suffered from its disastrous consequences. Never again. The dictatorship of the world proletariat will lead to the sharpest global class struggle against all the open and hidden forces of restoration of world capitalism. Comintern SH, Our 12 Main Measures for the Overthrow of World Capitalism, 2018. The representatives of this new left ideology is also unsurprisingly homophobic. Quote, As far as our position on heterosexuality, homosexuality, or bisexuality, etc. is concerned, we are guided by our communist principle. We are against all those bourgeois sexual movements in the capitalist society which are hostile to our struggle for the world socialist revolution. Comintern SH, Problem of Sexuality, Questions and Answers, 2016. This development of left communism disguising itself with empty support for Marxism-Leninism is a new one, and not one unexpected. Remember neo-revisionism, that is, revisionism that claims to be anti-revisionist, e.g. Maoism. That those who were once politically class-conscious have fallen into the bourgeois trap of these ideologies is a sad fact. Conclusion. Comrades, left communism is a bourgeois revisionist ideology that cannot practically work, as it completely misunderstands Marxism and attempts to revise it. Marxism-Leninism is not obsolete, and it is the revolutionary science that will emancipate the proletariat. Following the path of Marx and Engels, for workers of the world to unite does not mean that socialism cannot be built in one country. The vanguard party can lead the rest of the proletarian class to victory, and commodity production, but not capital, can be built under socialism. Left communism is a liberal ideology, which is appealing to those who are afraid of figures such as Lenin and Stalin, and see them as scary, but it is by no means harmless. It must be put an end to. Left communism is only left in words and symbols, but utterly and hopelessly rightist indeed. Quote, Lenin referred to the left communists as leftists sometimes, with and sometimes without quotation marks, but everyone realizes that Lenin called them lefts ironically, thereby emphasizing that they were lefts only in words, in appearance, but that in reality they represented petty bourgeois right trends. There you have a picture of the specific platform and the specific methods of the lefts. This, in fact, explains why the lefts sometimes succeed in luring a part of the workers over to their side with the help of high-sounding left phrases, and by posing as the most determined opponents of the rights. Although all the world knows that they, the lefts, have the same social rules as the rights, and that they not infrequently join in an agreement, a bloc with the rights in order to fight the Leninist line. But if the Trotskyist trend represents a left deviation, does this not mean that the lefts are more to the left than Leninism? No, it does not. Leninism is the most left, without quotation marks, trend in the world labor movement. We Leninists belong to the Second International down to the outbreak of the imperialist war as the extreme left group of the Social Democrats. We did not remain in the Second International, and we advocated a split in the Second International precisely because, being the extreme left group, we did not want to be in the same party as the petty bourgeois traitors to Marxism, the social pacifists and social chauvinists. Stalin, industrialization of the country and the right deviation in the CPSUB, 1928. Acknowledgements. Thank you Philip Kovalich, Heather Mason, and Saul Wenger for your help in writing this article. Workers of the world, unite. Thank you very much for listening. I have been culturally proletarian. I apologize for the noticeable problems with my voice and the sickness in the audio at some points. I've been sick in the making of this, but I hope it's not too horrible to listen to. Anywho, join BOLORG, get organized. Sarodina, Sastalina, workers of the world unite, and goodbye.